The world's biggest franchise almost died during a pitch meeting. In 1990, Satoshi Tajiri brought a brand new concept to Nintendo. He called the project Capsule Monsters, and he based the core design on his childhood hobby of catching bugs in the woods. The executives at Nintendo didn't understand the vision, and due to that, they rejected the pitch outright. But Tajiri refused to quit, and he brought the game back to the executives multiple times. Each time, Nintendo said no. Then Shigeru Miyamoto stepped in because he saw the potential in the idea. So he mentored Tajiri and helped push the concept forward. With Miyamoto on board, Nintendo changed its mind and it gave the project funding and a new name. If you look at the early concept art, you will see a young girl standing right next to the main hero and the rival. She appears constantly in the initial design documents, and she's usually drawn with a Squirtle. She was meant to be the third main character. You can find her in the official manga adaptation. She held a clear role in the early plan, but the developers cut her before launch, removing her entirely from the final game. The face of the franchise almost looked very different. We see Pikachu everywhere now, but it was not the original choice for the face of the stories. Clefairy held the mascot spot at the start, which you can see in the early promotional material. Commercials and early manga show the main character with a Clefairy by his side as his signature Pokemon. The plan changed when the anime started production. The team decided Clefairy wasn't quite right for the screen, so they swapped it out for Pikachu. They wanted a design that looked more iconic and appealed to a wider crowd. And the switch worked because Pikachu became a global star, while Clefairy faded into the background as a relic of the initial design phase. Bulbasaur holds the #1 spot in the Pokédex, but it wasn't the first Pokemon created. Rhydon takes that title because it was the very first monster design the team finalized. You can clearly see early sketches of it in the original 1990 Capsule Monsters pitch document. The game code proves Rhydon's age because if you look at Bulbasaur's Pokédex entry, he is 001, but Rhydon sits at internal index number 01 in the actual programming of Pokémon Red. The developers left a permanent tribute to this history. Walk into any gym in the Kanto region and look at the 2 stone statues standing by the entrance. They all share the same design because they are statues of Rhydon. I feel like before I move on, this has to be said now. Pokemon is a game that I played as a child, and I remember a lot of the Pokemon's names, but being the fact that I've literally called them certain names ever since I was a kid, I'm sorry if I butcher your Pokemon's name.
Golden Thor.
I don't think it's gonna happen, but just in case, okay? Just a bit of a disclaimer on my end. Moving on. There are 151 Pokemon, but there are only 37 unique audio cries. The hardware had strict limits because the developers needed to save every byte of space on the cartridge. So they took 37 bass sounds and stretched them, tweaked the pitch and the playback speed to mask the recycling. It is easy to spot if you listen closely. Take Charizard and Rhyhorn. They sound like 2 distinct beasts, but they share the exact same core cry. The developers traded variety for technical survival. Dig into the game data and you will find a bird type. It is completely unfinished because it has no weakness and no resistances. Developers likely used it as a placeholder for the flying type early in production. Since they never fully wiped it from the cartridge, you can still access it using glitches or cheating devices. This reveals how much the game changed behind the scenes. The final type chart in Gen 1 was a mess of balance issues. The developers treated types like a puzzle. They had to balance elemental strengths and weaknesses on a tiny handheld screen. The bird type shows they were still iterating on these core mechanics right until the end. You can walk up to the Rhydon statues at the entrance of any gym, take out your old rod, and start fishing. You will actually get a bite. The game treats those solid stone statues exactly like water tiles, because the developers failed to set the proper collision properties for those objects. Because of that, you are fishing in thin air, but the game insists there is a pond inside the structure. It is one of the strangest glitches in the entire series. The bike shop in Cerulean City is a cruel joke because the owner demands 1 million Poké-dollars for a bicycle. Seems normal, right? But there is one major problem. The game code caps your wallet at 999,999 Poké-dollars. So you physically cannot carry enough money to make the purchase, and the developers intentionally locked the price just out of reach. You spend the entire game thinking you need to save up, but you don't. The game forces you to take a different path. You have to find a bike voucher in Vermilion City to get the item for free. The $1 million price tag is a brick wall meant to steer you toward a specific quest. The move Focus Energy is a total trap. The manual claims it boosts your critical hit rate, and it promises you a better chance of landing a heavy blow. The code does the exact opposite. A bug in the game logic miscalculates the math, and it divides your critical hit chance by 4 instead of multiplying it. Using the move actively hurts your performance because you waste a turn to make your Pokemon worse. The most famous monster in Pokemon history isn't even a Pokemon. It's called MissingNo, and it exists entirely because of a memory address error. The glitch happens when the game tries to load data from a spot it assumes is full, only to find something else entirely. Here is how the oversight unfolds. First, you talk to the old man in Viridian City to watch his catching tutorial. To do this, the game forces your player name to change temporarily, storing your actual name in a memory slot normally reserved for wild Pokemon encounters. The real problem arises when the tutorial ends. The game fails to clear that slot. If you immediately fly to Cinnabar Island and surf along the coastline, the game needs to generate a wild encounter. Because Cinnabar's coast accidentally lacks its own encounter data, the game pulls from that uncleared memory address instead. When the game hits this wall, it checks for a Pokemon ID but finds an invalid value. Unable to find a match in its index, it displays the only placeholder text it can, MissingNo, short for missing number. Next, the graphics shatter. The game tries to load a sprite for a creature that doesn't exist, so it defaults to whatever junk data is currently sitting in the video memory, usually the titles from the last map you walked on. That is why MissingNo looks like a flickering, scrambled block. It is literally just a broken image of the ground you walked on just a minute ago. When you encounter MissingNo, the game also gets confused about your bag. It assumes you just caught a Pokemon holding an item, so it pulls that quantity of whatever is in your 6th inventory slot and adds 128 to it. Suddenly, you have 129 of that item, allowing you to turn a single rare candy into a mountain of them in seconds. The Hall of Fame record gets hit as well. The game acts as though you just finished a trainer battle and logs the glitched encounter data into your winning lineup. As a result, your Hall of Fame screen transforms into a wall of broken, flickering tiles. The game can completely lose track of who you are. This happens when you trigger specific glitches, like fighting invalid trainers. When building the opponent's team, the game reaches into the wrong data and begins reading your own player stats as monster data. This oversight pulls the identity of the person holding the controller directly into the world of the NPCs. If the data overrides incorrectly, your player name changes completely. You are no longer the protagonist. The game files now list your name as Unk. I'm just kidding. It's Old Man. The change is absolute. If you walk into a Pokemon Center, the PC on the desk changes its label. It is no longer your PC. It is Unk's PC. Old Man's PC. Old Man's PC, I'll stop. From that point on, NPCs stop using your name and call you by the title stolen from the tutorial. If you want to keep track and never forget about us, give us a like and subscribe as it goes a long way. Thank you. The most legendary Pokemon in the series wasn't even supposed to exist. Nintendo had no idea Mew was in the game because it was added as a secret prank. Programmer Shigeki Morimoto snuck the creature into the code during the final days of development, tossing it in as an internal joke after the team finished debugging the main game. He squeezed the data into a tiny bit of leftover space on the cartridge tucking it away where he thought it would remain hidden forever. The team intended for Mew to be an exclusive reward for internal staff, and it was never meant for the public. It took years for rumors to spread and for the myth to explode, turning a single rogue piece of code into the most valuable monster in the franchise. Most players remember Red and Blue as the definitive starting point because that is how the series arrived in the West. We associate those original covers with Charizard and Blastoise, making it feel like the natural beginning. However, the history looks completely different in Japan. The Blue version did not launch alongside Red. Instead, the series began with Red and Green. Venusaur stood as an original mascot alongside Charizard, and Blastoise did not exist as a version mascot at the very start. The Japanese Blue version came later as a refined update to fix bugs and upgrade the pixel art, serving as a polished second wave. We think of Red and Blue as the original pair because of how the games were exported, but the identity of the franchise shifted before it ever crossed the ocean. Western players were actually playing a revised edition of the game that started with a totally different pair of mascots. The games hide some dark secrets. Look at the Fire Red Pokédex entry for Kadabra. It states that a boy with extrasensory powers woke up in bed one morning, finding out that he had transformed into a Kadabra. This creates a grim implication that every Kadabra you catch or trade used to be a human child. The franchise drops this fact and moves on, and the game never explains how these kids end up living out in the wild grass. Machamp throws 1,000 punches in 2 seconds, and its arms react before its brain thinks, and that's why it dominates in a fight. The Hoenn Pokédex adds a catch to this power. Machamp has 0 dexterity in its fingers. It cannot do any delicate work. Now, you have a 4-armed monster that can move mountains, but cannot tie its own shoes. Hyper Beam, the total game breaker in the first generation. It is supposed to have a massive drawback where you attack and then spend the next turn recharging. However, the code fails to enforce this. If you knock out the target, the recharge phase never triggers. This means you can fire off Hyper Beam again on the very next turn, and this mistake completely wrecked the competitive balance. Players just spammed the move to delete the opposing team one by one because they did not have to worry about the delay. It turned the most powerful attack in the game into a fast infinite nuke, which forced every serious player to build their team around it. You were either using Hyper Beam or you were losing. Later games finally fixed the bug, but the original Red and Blue remain a playground for this broken strategy. The final scene in the Indigo Plateau feels like a triumph. You beat the champion, and Professor Oak rushes into the room to congratulate you. It looks like he arrived at the perfect moment to see your victory. But Oak isn't actually talking to you when he enters. He's talking to his grandson, and he traveled to the league to celebrate Blue's victory. He expected to crown his own grandson as the new champion, but he walked into the room just seconds after you defeated Blue, finding his grandson moments after the devastating loss. The final challenge you face is not actually the one the developers intended. If you look deep into the game data, you will find an abandoned battle that proves Professor Oak was meant to be the true final boss of the game. He was planned to step in either as the ultimate champion or immediately after your fight with Blue. He held a full team of high-level Pokémon, including the specific starter that neither you nor your rival chose. This would have given him a tactical edge based on your own team selection. Though he was cut from the final release, the development team clearly liked the idea of a legendary trainer waiting at the end of the road. They dusted off this exact concept years later for the sequel, turning it into the iconic battle against Red at the top of Mount Silver. The ghost of Oak's unfinished boss fight lived on in the legacy of the series. Saffron City hides a silent power struggle. When you walk into the city, you see 2 separate buildings labeled as gyms, but tackling one reveals it is not the official gym at all. It is the Fighting Dojo, which is a relic of a time before the Psychic type takeover. Before Sabrina arrived, the dojo held the official title and was the place to earn your Saffron badge. But then Sabrina showed up and dominated. She walked into the dojo and completely crushed their claim to the city, asserting herself as the only true gym leader. It was a brutal display of type superiority because fighting types are naturally weak to psychic powers. She dismantled the dojo leaders with ease. This is one of the few times we see genuine politics and conflict in the Kanto region. Have you ever wanted to get permanently stuck late into a video game with no means of progressing, rolling back your save, or having any fun? Probably not. But here is how you can do it anyway. So long as you have never picked up a fishing rod, head over to Cinnabar Island. Once you are there, release every single Pokemon in your party except for a single monster that does not know fly or surf. Congratulations. You have officially stranded yourself on an island with no way to get off. To make the situation truly hopeless, empty your bag of all Pokeballs and blow your remaining cash on potions that you no longer need. You are now a literal prisoner of your own save file. You cannot catch anything, you cannot battle, and you cannot leave. It is a lonely permanent end to your journey. There is a persistent myth that rock types are immune to electricity, and it is one of the biggest misconceptions in the entire series. The confusion starts with the trading card game, which lumped rock and ground types into the same category. So players assumed the games followed the same logic. However, in Pokemon Yellow, when you walk into Brock's gym with a Pikachu and you click your electric moves, the game hits you with a dreaded, not very effective. It connects, but it feels useless. Since Pikachu is at an inherent disadvantage and Brock is the same face of rock-type trainers, players walked away with the wrong lesson. They internalized the idea that electricity just bounces off rocks, but in the actual game, rock types have no such immunity, and electricity hits them for neutral damage. It was just the Yellow's version-specific encounter design that made it feel like an impossible matchup. Psychic types were absolute gods in the first generation. The entire metagame revolved around them because of the way the game calculated stats. The special stats functioned as both special attack and special defense, meaning if a Pokemon had a high number there, it was a wall and a cannon at the same time. They also had the move Amnesia, which boosted the special stat by 2 full stages, so a single click of that button made your Pokemon nearly impossible to kill while hitting back with lethal force. The typing itself was completely broken because no common type resisted psychic attacks, leaving players with almost zero defensive options. The only typing weakness was Bug, but there were no decent Bug-type attacks in the entire game. But weren't Ghost types meant to be a counter? But the only Ghost attack that dealt fixed damage based on stats was Lick, which did pathetic damage, by the way. To make matters worse, every Ghost Pokemon in the first generation was also part Poison type. This design choice actually made them weak to Psychic, completely reversing the intended matchup. If you saw an Alakazam on the enemy team, the match was already effectively over. It was a flawed system that rewarded one type above all others, and you were either using Psychic types or just waiting to lose. The modern game is heavily built on breeding and gender mechanics, forcing players to spend hours hunting for the right traits and passing down moves. In the first generation, none of that existed. Pokemon had no gender, and they were treated as completely genderless data points. There was only one strange exception to this rule: the Nidoran family. The game treated Nidoran male and Nidoran female as 2 completely separate species. They had different sprites, they had different stats, and they even occupied completely different slots in the Pokédex. It was the only time the game acknowledged sex in a world where every other Pokemon was a mystery. The Clefairy doll is a bizarre item with an even more bizarre use. Its in-game description claims it simply helps you escape a wild battle by acting as a temporary diversion, but the way it interacts with the scripted world is completely nonsensical. The best example of this happens with the Ghost Marowak in the Pokemon Tower. This spirit is meant to be a terrifying scripted obstacle. You are supposed to fight through the tower, find the Sylph Scope, and use it to reveal the truth behind the ghost to lay it to rest. It is a major story beat for the region. However, you can ignore all of that with a single item. If you pull out a Clefairy doll during the battle, the ghost of Marowak is apparently so confused or distracted that it flees the scene. You don't need the Silphscope, and you don't need to engage with the mystery. You just show the ghost a toy and it gives up, letting you walk right past one of the biggest roadblocks in the game and sequence breaking a whole chunk of the Lavender Town narrative in seconds. The ultimate goal of the game is literally right there in the title. Gotta catch 'em all. You spend dozens of hours tracking down every single monster, filling every slot in your Pokédex, and mastering the rarest encounters to reach the peak of the experience. When you finally finish, you log the final entry, expecting a grand reward, a legendary battle, or maybe a small unlockable area to, celebrate your grand achievement. Instead, you get a piece of paper. That's right, the game presents you with a beautiful, staggeringly awesome, bland digital diploma that tells you exactly what you already know. That is it. There is no fanfare. There's no hidden dungeon. There's no secret monster. You completed a massive, time-consuming challenge, only to receive a static screen of text that does nothing, making it a highly anticlimactic end to a journey that demanded everything from the player. Were you as disappointed as I was? Don't worry about it. You're not alone. You're not alone. The Safari Zone items present a puzzle that never gets solved. You are forced to use specific Safari balls, which only work inside those fence lines. The game never explains why your standard high-tech Ultra Balls suddenly become completely useless the moment you step into the park. It makes you wonder if the wild monsters here are magically shielded, or if the park air somehow degrades the technology in your bag. Even the catch mechanics inside the zone are a complete mess. The Safari Balls are incredibly weak, often forcing you to hurl a dozen of them at a single average Taurus just to watch them bounce off like pebbles. It is frustrating and inconsistent, but the game demands you use these specific inferior tools in one specific location, creating a random barrier that ignores all the capture rules you spent the rest of the game learning. Deep inside the internal files, the unusual default names for the protagonist and his rival are actually Nintendo and Sony. This choice was a pointed jab during the height of the mid-90s console wars because the name Nintendo served as a clear nod to Nintendo's own Earthbound series, where the main character carried the same name. Sony, meanwhile, was a direct reference to the rival console manufacturer that was aggressively pushing into the gaming market at the time. It was a petty and clever inside joke from the developers, hidden away in the code as a quiet reminder of the corporate battle lines of the era. The official art archives hide one of the most baffling images in the series. If you look closely at the early concept art on the Game Freak website, you will find a piece that completely defies all law. It shows Red standing in the snow holding a shovel while posing with an Articuno and a regular seal. If that was not strange enough, there is a detailed snow sculpture in the background. It is a perfect recreation of the three Kanto starters, Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. The image does not fit the game's world at all. There is no snowy region in Kanto where you can build sculptures, and there is absolutely no gameplay mechanic involving shovels or real-world seals. It looks like a surreal holiday-themed fever dream that never made it into the actual journey. Red grows throughout the timeline of the franchise. He changes from a child to a teenager and eventually to a full-grown adult. But his starting age actually depends entirely on where you bought the game. In the Japanese and North American release of the first generation, he is explicitly 11 years old. However, if you played the European version, the text states that he is 10. The 1-year gap exists for no clear reason, serving as a random regional discrepancy that never got ironed out during localization. He does not stay a child forever though. By the time Gold and Silver arrive, he is roughly 13 or 14, having moved on to become a legendary recluse on the top of a mountain. Fast forward to Sun and Moon, and he is a grown man, with estimates putting his age somewhere between 21 and 31. Upon release, Pokémon Red and Blue became an absolute cultural phenomenon. The initial launch in Japan started incredibly slow, relying almost entirely on word of mouth to build momentum. Once players discovered the trading mechanic, the game exploded. It quickly became one of the best-selling RPGs of its time, moving tens of millions of copies worldwide and single-handedly saving the aging Game Boy from obsolescence. The design forced players to socialize, requiring you to talk to friends to catch every single creature and link physical cables to evolve your team. This structure became the definitive blueprint for the modern industry. Every massive media franchise that followed, from Yu-Gi-Oh! To Digimon, chased the specific success of Pokémon. It remains one of the best-selling titles in history, and we still feel that massive impact today. The entire genre of creature collection exists because of these two games, and they remain deeply loved to this day. Alright everyone, this is not in the script, this is just between me, you, and the editor editing this video right now. I need you to type Blaziken rules in the comment section. Don't say anything else, don't comment on anything else, just type Blaziken rules. Why? Because I want to confuse the writer of this video. So if you've reached this part of the video, go ahead and do that, okay? Anyways, on release, Super Mario Bros. Was also a phenomenon, so watch our video on Super Mario Bros. Next. That's probably going to get deleted, isn't it? We'll see. We'll see.